Saints are ordinary people who say yes to God, and then he does extraordinary things with their lives. There we go. These are the three shepherd children. Jacinta, Francesco and Lucia are the three children here. Now, two of them, these two here are brother and sister. This was, I can't remember if it was a cousin or a friend of the family. They lived in the small same village in Fatima. Now, when Our Lady appeared to these three shepherd children as they were out attending their sheep, she told them that there would be a war if people didn't convert. There'd be a war even greater than the war that was happening in the world now, a worse war, that would kind of follow this war, and it would be something to do with Russia, and that Russia would spread its errors throughout the world, and that the church would be persecuted. Now, these children were probably relatively naive about the goings-on in the world, but when the children told the priest this, it was all a bit confusing, because Russia at that time was a very faithful country, a very Christian country, and quite a poor country really. So there didn't seem much chance that Russia, even though it was a big country, didn't see much of a chance that there was going to be much going on there, because they didn't have the money to take over the world. And also that it was such a pious country, such a Catholic country, a Christian country, that it didn't seem that surely persecution couldn't happen in Russia, because so faith is so strong there. Mary said to the children, that in order for this not to happen, the Pope would have to consecrate. Now that's a word that simply just means give over to Mary. So we talk about consecration to Mary. That just means giving everything over to Mary so she can look after it, she can deal with it. So sometimes individuals consecrate themselves to Mary to say, I'm going to give you everything about my life, Mary, so you can do with it what Jesus would want. So Mary said to these children, get the Pope to consecrate the world to my immaculate heart. So we looked at immaculate yesterday, a pure heart, and it'll be all right. Now, these three children, I mean, look at them. They probably went, what? And so, this will happen. Now, we're not going to look too much at them, but there's something else that she said. She said to them that they had a vision of a pope, a man in white, which they believed to be the Pope, a man in white who was going to suffer much, who would be shot and killed. Now, that was only told to the church authorities at the time, and it was known at the time, because nobody else knew, as the last Fatima secret. It was written down, put in an envelope after the children had told them, and it was put away. Now, this happened, this particular vision, it happened in 1917 on the 13th of May at 5 o'clock. I want to whistle stop through how many years, let me check, 64 years, because on the 13th of May 1981, okay, 13th of May 1981, at 5 o'clock, so 64 years later, in St. Peter's Square in Rome, a little white Jeep leaves the kind of Vatican apartments with Pope John Paul II in it. The Pope comes out for his Wednesday audience to talk to the crowds. Actually, there's some footage of him. He picks up this kind of baby, leans over, picks up a baby and kind of holds it up to the crowd, gives it a little blessing, hands it back to the mother there. It goes on, and then 2 gunshots. From a close range, the Pope was shot. One just missing his elbow, or kind of just catching his elbow, and the other straight into his abdomen, and he obviously collapsed instantly. So the Swiss Guards, best trained army in the world, jumped on him, sped him off to the hospital. Now what happened next? Well, basically, the bullet wound, it was within 1/10 of an inch, so teeny tiny amounts, 1/10 of an inch, away from puncturing some vital organs kind of in his abdomen, which would have meant he would have bled to death on the way to the hospital. But 1/10 of an inch meant that this didn't happen, and he actually lived. When Pope John Paul II kind of came round, he asked for the envelope about the 10th Fatima secret, which I don't know whether he'd read it before or whether he'd heard about it or what, but he asked for the envelope about this man dressed in white who would suffer, and now the end of that said it would be shot and killed. On the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, this lady who talked about this to the children, he believed that it was Our Lady of Fatima who'd saved his life that day. And it was a little while later, when he was fit and well and up and again, he consecrated the world, as she'd requested, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Now, that hadn't happened before, and Russia had become a communist state. Christianity had been kind of pushed out. It had become a very atheistic society. But Pope John Paul II claimed that back. And one of the things that happened with Pope John Paul II during his time as Pope was that communism was kind of slowly pushed out. You can read more about that on another occasion. The bullet, now, I don't know whether that's the bullet that hit his elbow or the bullet that went in, because I presume the bullet that went in shattered and kind of went in several directions, but the bullet in some form is actually kept in the crown of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima as a reminder of what the intercession, what the prayers of Our Lady of Fatima did on that day. Now, what does that mean for us? I think through this story of the apparition in Fatima, it reminds us that placing things into Mary's hands, into Mary's care, consecrating, that word again, consecrating ourselves to Mary, giving ourselves to her, is the way forward. There's no other way of saying that. That actually, people say, well, why can't we do it straight to Jesus? But we've had that discussion the other day. It's because she wants to take us to Jesus. She's that loving mother who wants to carry us. Now, it might surprise you that there are a lot of people claiming to have Marian apparitions left, right and centre. You know, these children could have been lying. You know, the church authorities would have found that. There's actually, the church deals with quite a lot of people saying that they've seen Mary or Jesus or lots of other people. But what the church says about an apparition being true or not true is this. It looks at the fruits of that apparition. So with these things, it takes time. So we learn about the wisdom of the church in these apparitions. Now, these three shepherd children, they were ordinary people who said yes to God, and God did extraordinary things with their lives. Mary appeared to him. Now, he didn't know who Mary was. It wasn't a Christian country at that time. Mary, it was just a beautiful lady. That's how he described her. A beautiful lady with light just shining round her. And this lady spoke his language. Mary told him who she was, that she was the mother of God. She then told him about Jesus, that he was the saviour of the world, that this saviour of the world, Jesus, was the Son of God Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, and that Juan should go to the bishop who lived in the next city, a city that Juan had never been to. He was just like a normal village guy. He'd never been to. Go and speak to this bishop and ask the bishop to build a church so that people could come and worship this God who was her son. So he was like, right. So he went and made the journey to the city, a city at age 57 he'd never been to before. He went to see the bishop, and the servants of the bishop were a bit kind of suspicious about what this was all about. Eventually he saw the bishop, and the bishop said, okay, I'll think about it. If you want to come back again, that's fine. And so he went away feeling like a bit disappointed that, there hadn't been this massive revelation. So he went back to the hill to tell Mary what the deal was and what had happened. And she'd said, go back to him again. And he was feeling so unworthy and so like, well, why me? Surely there's somebody else. And she said to him, I've chosen you. You're good enough for the job, go for it. So he went back to the bishop. He had to wait for 2 hours to actually see the bishop. The bishop then said, well, tell this lady that I need a sign. So he was like, Argh. So he had to go back. He went to the hill and said, the bishop asks for a sign. Mary said, come back to me the next day and I'll give you a sign. Now, Juan went home, and his uncle was severely ill, to the point of death. So he had to stay with his uncle and wasn't able to go back the next day. And so he went to go and get a priest for the last rites, so it could be given to his uncle. But the route to the priest was on this hill where Our Lady had appeared to him. So off he trots, and sure enough, she's there waiting for him. And he explained, I'm just on the way to get a priest for my uncle who's not very ill. And she just said to him, it's all right, you don't need to go and get a priest. Your uncle's fine now. you don't need to go. So he was like, oh, okay. So she was almost like, right, let's get back to business with this sign thing then. So she asked him to go further up the hill to cut some flowers. Now, it was freezing on top of the mountain, and he was thinking, this is ridiculous. Who ever heard of a freezing mountain having flowers on it? But sure enough, as you can expect, he walked up the hill and found some beautiful, beautiful roses in full bloom. So he was like, okay, well, why does this surprise me? Cut them all down. He had like a poncho on, called a tilma, a poncho on, and he kind of used it to scoop up the roses. He put all the roses in, then carried them back to Mary and showed Mary the roses. And Mary said, right, go and show the bishop these roses, but don't show them to anybody else. He'll be totally fine with it. He'll get the sign, all as well. So he kind of trots off with all these roses and goes to see the bishop. Now, when he gets to the bishop, he then says, Mary's given us a sign. He's asked us to collect these flowers. Here they are. And out, he kind of unfolds his tilma, his poncho, and out of this poncho, the roses didn't fall out, they weren't there. This image was imprinted on his tilma. This is 1531, okay? Now this was the image of Our Lady that he had seen. Now, that was kind of happy ever after. He went home, his uncle was fine. Mary had appeared to his uncle and said, she'd said basically, my name's Holy Mary of Guadalupe, tell them that. So he gets home, his uncle's fine. His uncle says, Our Lady of Guadalupe has, Holy Mary of Guadalupe has appeared to me, happy ever after. But what happened next? And this is the bit that amazes me, okay? This image of Our Lady. I want to tell you a little bit about this image. This image was printed onto the tilma. They have no idea how it was done, because it's almost like a photographic print, but it was way before cameras ever existed, like way, way, way before cameras ever existed. But it's got something of that. There's something that kind of, when we look at a photo, we don't necessarily think now that it's amazing that can happen. But it's that sort of thing. We see from her face that she's quite young, she's fairly youthful. Now, the Aztec people, this was an Aztec style piece of art. So when the Aztec people, the people of Mexico, saw this, they recognized immediately certain things about this lady. Whoever this lady was, they recognized certain things. 6 million people converted within 6 years. 6 million people converted. Because they looked at this image and they saw the face of this young maiden. They saw stars which represented the heavens and holiness and divinity. So they knew there was something about her that, not necessarily her, but there was something to do with holiness about her. There's lots of, you can't quite see it on this image, but there's lots of 8-petal and there's only one 4-petal flower on there. And it's over her womb, about here, over her womb, which represented life and movement. In Aztec culture, a sash was worn round the waist when a woman was pregnant, so they looked at it and knew she was pregnant. The cuffs on her kind of dress, when you see an image better, is kind of fur and rolled back. And that was the sign of nobility. But actually, she's dressed in Jewish clothing. So they knew, those who were eventually found out and recognised later, that she was someone of Jewish nobility. Now, we heard last night about Mary coming from a kind of a noble line. In her hand, they knew she wasn't divine because in her hands she was praying. So they knew that there's something greater than her that she was praying to. The moon that she stands on, you can't quite see it, but she stands on the moon. We had listened to a quotation from Revelation yesterday. I can't remember, it was to do with the stars around her head, wasn't it? That same quotation talks about the lady standing on a moon, so she stood on the moon. And again, you can't quite see it here, but behind her, there's a big, like, kind of reflection of a sun. Now, the Aztec people worshipped the sun. They thought the sun was their god. And Mary stood in front of this and blocking out the light. So she's in, forget about that. This is something new here. 6 million people converted. It's like nuts. Now, Mary, in the this picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe, this image, it's Our Lady, star of the new evangelization. Star because she points the way. New evangelization simply means passing on the faith. She appeared to the Aztec people in a way that they could understand. And this is where it comes to us. Because in the next 2 minutes, I'm just going to whistle through the reason why we need to be stars of the new evangelization in the way that Mary was. Because the children of Fatima, St. Bernadette and Juan Diego, they were ordinary people who said yes to God, who God did extraordinary things with their lives. We are ordinary people. We need to say yes to God. What did these saints do, these blesseds do, that we can learn? They prayed. When in your day do you pray on a normal... I'm not asking you to tell me. When in your normal life do you pray? Do you pray at all? Do you just pray at school? Do you pray sometimes half-heartedly when you need something, or fully when you need something? But when do you talk to God in your day? It may sound extreme, but every single day you should be talking to God. At least once, if not several times. For 30 seconds or 30 minutes. I don't mind how you pray, but at some point during the day, have a conversation with God. Tell him what's going on. Tell him where you need his help. Thank him for something. Prayer. Mass. As Catholics, we have a beautiful privilege of Mass, which we don't have time to go into the beauty of Mass. But the Church asks us every Sunday that we attend Mass and on holy days. If Mass isn't part of your kind of regular routine, for whatever reason, this isn't a judgment. Sometimes our families don't go, sometimes we kind of go some Sundays and not others. As young adults, I want to set you a challenge that if you don't go to church every Sunday, think about that and work out if there's a way that you can make that happen. Because actually, you're not children, you're young adults, and the church asks this of you. Now, I'm not saying practicalities are always easy, but there's always ways around it. So get to Mass. And if you go to Mass every single Sunday and you think, well, that one's not relevant to me, my challenge to you is there an evening Mass during the week that perhaps you could go to? Just putting it out there. It might be easier for some of you older ones or not so much younger, but just putting it out there. The third thing is, you have learned so much about your faith over this weekend, just by conversations with people, from the talks, from the workshops, from, listening to people's stories. But Lux isn't the be-all and end-all of you learning about your faith. If you want to know good websites where you can ask questions, Neil and the team will be able to point you in the direction of that. If you want to email them with questions, they can point you in the direction of people who can answer them. There's hundreds of good Catholic websites that can give you the answer to your question. Your faith learning doesn't end here. Or you don't have to wait till the next Lux weekend or the next pilgrimage to find out. So prayer, Mass, learning. Yesterday, loads of you went to confession. I'm fairly certain that most of you will sin sometime in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm not saying you're going to murder anybody, but if you're anything like me, you won't murder anyone, but you'll bite at someone, you'll ignore someone, you'll do things your own way, you can't be bothered to answer that call because actually you know they're going to whinge, but actually that person needs help, but you're not going to answer the call anyway. You're going to gossip about someone. You may or may not sleep with your girlfriend, boyfriend. You may or may not tell lies to your parents about where you're going. You may or may not take drugs or drink too much alcohol underage. You may or may not do these things, just put it out there. But, however little or big those sins be, get to confession. Don't hold on to it. Make a resolution. Say, no more. This is the way forward. Get on with it. Like, I go to confession every 1 to 3 weeks, 1 to 4 weeks sometimes. That's not because I'm holy. It's exactly the opposite. It's because I'm not a very nice person at times and I need to go and say sorry. Get to confession. And the fifth thing is the most important thing to carry the others out, is keep in touch with Christian friends who you've made here. Keep in touch with them so you don't have to go to confession on your own. That on Sunday Mass, your family aren't going. Go with your friend. If it means that you need to learn something about together, talk about it with them. Give each other permission to do these things together. Prayer, Mass, learn about your faith, confession, and friends, good friends, who'll tell you when you shouldn't do things or when you should be going to Mass, or who'll help you to learn. This is how we become, from ordinary people, we begin to say yes to God, and he then does extraordinary things with our lives. And who knows what can happen then? Who knows? God's got great plans for each of you, and putting these things into place as a regular part of your life are the ways to kind of ensure that you're open to God so that he can come in and do amazing things.